Everybody, this is Rashad Gibson. I'm the founder of United America, and I am also the founder and president of United America Christian Academy. And I want to make this video in regards to sharing about our upcoming class, which is entitled Our Republic, Our Responsibility, How American Liberty, how Biblical Principles Protect American Liberty. Now, this is a class that is incredibly important because there's so many different things that are happening in our culture that is clearly subverting, undermining the very liberty that we have been given. But more importantly, in today's day, we have lost sight of where our liberty comes from and our responsibility of it. And so this class, it is designed and detailed to educate and to teach about our founding and what our responsibilities are and why we have to value certain aspects of our inheritance, if you will. And so I just want to share briefly of what this class is about, and so that you can have a general idea of what you'll be learning if you're interested in joining. The class is going to be free. It's going to be online, so you don't have to, it's free of charge. You don't have to pay anything. We just want people to attend so that they can come away with a more profound understanding of their American heritage and where it comes from, where we get our liberty from, why is it important, why we must uphold these things, what can we do to get involved, things of the sort. So first thing I want to touch on is the first course, which is entitled The Forgotten Foundation. Now, the reason why I entitled this class The Forgotten Foundation is exactly that. We have forgotten our foundation. And so in the class, we're going to touch on a sermon in which was preached by the Reverend Jedediah Morse back in 1799. Now, Jedediah Morse was the father of American geography, but he was also a pastor up in Massachusetts. And in this particular sermon, it's a fast day sermon, which, of course, we don't hear about these nowadays, in which the nation would call for a day of fasting. The president, John Adams, called for a day of fasting. And so on that day, Jedediah Morse preached this sermon at his church detailing the dangers that were occurring in that day. Now, one could say that this sermon was prophetic, but I can almost guarantee if we were to sit down and speak to Reverend Morse today, he would not view it that way. He would just be detailing what he saw happening and occurring in his day and the danger of these things that were occurring. And the reason why we're going to touch on this particular sermon is because the same dangers that he saw in his day is happening in our day. The difference is they understood what was going on. We do not understand what's going on, and we're largely ignoring what's going on, even within the church. So I'll give you an example. In this particular sermon, he is touching on the connection between political liberty and religious liberty. And he's talking about how the dangers that he saw on the horizon and even going on in that day is undermining political liberty and religious liberty, which was largely Christianity. And he saw it happening. And then he was pretty much sounding the alarm. He was being a watchman on the wall, warning his congregation. Now, the group that he calls out, which I would love to hear this in our day, but unfortunately, this is not happening in most churches, probably 90% of them. He called out the Illuminati as being the group that was subverting American liberty. Now, of course, today, if we hear that term or that group, it's a conspiracy theory. Now, the important thing about this is even modern day historians will talk about that. It was a conspiracy theory. It was no such thing, which obviously there was. But the one thing that you begin to understand is the Illuminati, what they were doing, according to Morse, was it was invading the newspapers. They were beginning to infuse immorality into the American public. They were doing all these different types of things that made it very, very clear that they were involved in uprooting the Christian foundations. And Morse was concerned about that because he understood if America became a profligate people, then the foundations which was laid, everything's going to crumble, because a free republic requires godly people. And so he gets into that. He gets into the role of church leaders, what we should be doing at in these particular times, and how we need to stand and things of the sort. But it wasn't just Jedediah Morse who was speaking this. We're going to look at some other people that were prominent in that day, Timothy Dwight being one. He was the president of Yale College. He spoke about this as well several times. And we're going to read some of his statements. But the point is, we're going to look at what they were saying in these sermons, but we're also going to look at what's going on today and how there are documented cases of groups attempting to subvert our American ideals. And I'm here to tell you, it's not just what we hear in the news, not just China and Russia. They're from within. And so now some are without, but a lot of them from within. So we're going to talk about that. And that kind of sets the tone for the other 5 classes, because the course is a total of 6 classes. That's the first course. Second course is going to deal with the influence behind our free republic. Very often we hear that the United States is a secular nation. It was founded upon the Enlightenment and our secular ideals, and it was never a Christian nation. All you got to do is turn on MSNBC, CNN, turn on all those different network channels, and that's what you will hear. Or go to your local college. That's what you're going to hear by and large. In fact, go to your local pastor, and that's what he will probably tell you, because we have been largely indoctrinated with that lie. This is one of the biggest lies, I think, that have been sold to us as Americans. And we're going to look at where that comes from as well in this class. But the one part that we're going to look at, a couple of things we're going to look at, is how can we know for sure that this nation was founded upon Christian ideals? How do we know for sure that this nation was based upon biblical principles? And so one of the things I can tell you we're going to look at, without giving everything away, is we're going to look at our state constitutions. You know, usually when we get into this debate of was America Christian or not, or blah, 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 usually we go to the federal constitution, which is important. However, I think practically speaking, and probably more importantly, was the state constitutions, because the state had more influence on the individual rather than the federal constitution, especially in that day. And so we need to look at what is in these state constitutions. What is the language? Because you hear often that, well, you know, the federal constitution doesn't mention God in it, so it's not really about God and nothing to do with God. So that is the evidence that we were a secular nation, blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you, when it comes to the state constitutions, the language is overtly Christian. Overtly. It is clear cut. So we're going to look at those different documents. Not only those documents, we're going to look at also the schools at that time, Dartmouth, Yale, Brown, Princeton, Harvard. You know, who founded these schools? Who was behind them? And then we're going to look at that, and maybe even some of the founders per se, if we have the time. So we're going to look at all of that and draw some conclusions of what do you think the truth is regarding the influence behind our nation, because it's very important. It's so important. It affects our everyday life today. I'm giving an example of why I say that. During the COVID crisis, during the mandates of the vaccine, you know, it was very disturbing to me because the state was forcing people to get an experimental vaccine that it was an experiment and it didn't protect you from anything. And so for me, I called my governor and I got in contact with his spokesman, and I voiced to him my displeasure about how these vaccine mandates were violating our American liberty. And he flat out told me, he said, Your idea of liberty is a figment of your imagination because the state gives you your rights. The state gives you your rights. That's what he told me. And at that time, I didn't realize I did realize at that time how crazy it was, but it shocked me that he was so brazen with it. And so we argued for about 45 minutes on that issue. And I was explaining to him how our rights are inalienable, found in the Declaration of Independence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he would say something, he would argue from an evolutionary atheistic point of view on how, the founders, they were more secular than religious and blah, 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 blah. He had been indoctrinated, but that is the norm. He didn't know what was in the state constitution. The state constitution of Connecticut is very clear of where we get our liberty from. And so we're going to talk about these type of things because they're very important. So yeah, we're going to talk about that. So third class is entailing the power of the gospel and how it relates to liberty. Now, I intentionally put this as a third class because it holds everything together. Without the gospel, without Christianity, you're not going to have a free republic. You're going to have what we have today, chaos. That is why you have people walking around thinking they're the opposite sex, and there are a good majority of people going along with it, along with all the other things that's going on, all the other corruption. But nevertheless, we're going to look at in this class the different aspects of liberty. What is biblical liberty? What does the Bible say about liberty? What understanding do we gather from that? What does the gospel speak to liberty? What did Jesus say about freedom? What are we being freed from? And what does it mean to be quote unquote free? What does it mean to have liberty? What comes along with that? I think these are key ideas that need to be discussed because unfortunately in our day, I think we largely confuse liberty with license. And if you do that, you're going to be in trouble. And so we're going to talk about that in that particular class. That'll be class number 3. Number 4 relates to class number 3, which is the importance of virtue while living in a free republic. Now, when I use the term virtue, most of us probably have never heard of it, but just don't use it. That's a term that's usually not used today for whatever reason, and I think it's intentional. Even look at your church. When is the last time you heard your pastor preach about virtue or any of the virtues? You just don't hear it. But it is central to the Christian life. In fact, in 2 Peter chapter 1, Peter talks about to supplement your faith with virtue. And then he goes on about 8 or 9 verses in telling why you need to do that. And so virtue is critical because when you read the founding fathers and the subsequent generation after that, what you're going to see is this constant talk about virtue, about morality, about Christianity, because they understood while living in a free republic, we have to be self-governing people. One of the things that John Adams said, our second president, he said, our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people. It is totally inadequate for any other. In other words, our Constitution, yes, is a legally binding document, but it could be legally binding all day long, have words on paper. But if you don't have people who are virtuous and want to live an upright life, it's not going to mean anything. That is why it is important to understand living a virtuous life within a free republic. And this is something that they constantly were writing about and talking about. So we're going to look at that and how it relates to, as I mentioned a second ago, the idea of self-government. Self-government is something that we don't hear today. Most of us, when we hear a government, we think about our state capitals. We think about, I live in Connecticut. We live not too far. We live about an hour from Hartford, where our state capital is. But then for you, if wherever you're at, if you're in New Jersey, in Trenton, if you're in New York, Albany, and so regardless of where you're at, your state capital is pretty much, or your national capital is the seat of civil government. There's obviously a difference. Self-government is largely you governing yourself. How do you govern yourself? And this is, one can say, the bedrock of a free republic is self-governance undergirded by virtue. Because the people who we elect as our representatives have to be virtuous people, because they're the ones who are going to be making the laws. And the laws, as we're going to see in, I think, the second course, they should be in sync with God's law. But if you have godless people who are not virtuous but feel the vice, you're going to have corrupt laws, which is going to create corrupt culture. And so the founders were genius in what they were doing, but as Benjamin Franklin said, when he was asked after the Constitutional Convention, when a young lady asked him, Mr. Franklin, do we have a republic or a monarchy? And he said, you have a republic if you can keep it. And so virtue within self-governance is critical. So we're going to discuss that in class number 4. Number 5, the 5th class is going to be entailing the role of church leaders within a free republic. As I said a couple minutes ago, unfortunately, in today's day, if you were to go to most pastors today, and I know this for a fact because I've had these discussions, when it comes to the role, when it comes to the responsibility of, just say, their role as a pastor, they think about it more or less as being parochial. In other words, their primary responsibility is to care for their sheep, their flock, their congregation, and to a large extent, that is true. I'm not disputing that whatsoever. That is something that's very incredibly important. But within that importance, within our free republic, they also have a responsibility to emphasize the liberty and freedom that we have to their flock and understanding these key points. And now you say, Rashad, you're being too political. No, I'm not. We've been so used to hearing that no, you should leave that out of it. No, you shouldn't. That's a lie. We have to understand that when it came to the founding of this nation, if it wasn't for the church, particularly the pulpit, you would not have a free republic. You would not have the freedoms that you have today. You would not have them at all. In fact, potentially, there would never have been a revolution. They would have just been enslaved as they thought was happening to them by King George. They wouldn't have fought back. But much of the fire, the fuel to have freedom was their understanding of Scripture. When you read, and this is something that I mentioned to my wife this past week, which is an indictment upon, unfortunately, Christian education. I have had almost 10 years of educational training. I have 4.5 years of undergrad in biblical studies, about 2.5 years of my master's, and now I'm going on my 3rd year of my PhD. And I can tell you, always in biblical studies and Christianity, I can tell you, I never heard of election sermons ever until about 2 years ago. And that was outside of my educational experience. I never heard of fast sermons. I never heard of artillery sermons and how all these things were being directed to the government by their request. I never heard any of it. And that's an indictment of how far we've fallen. I'm not necessarily saying that we need to, demand that these things happen today. It's the fact that we don't even know about it. We don't even have a clue about, my phone's going crazy right now, but we don't have a clue about it. And so I say that to say, we need to understand these things and know these things. This is why I say that as church leaders, we have to have an understanding of these things. We, at the very least, need to be familiar with these things. And once you become familiar with it and understand it, then you're going to begin to integrate this into your ministry because you start to understand your responsibility. So we're going to talk about that in the 5th class, the role of church leaders and the role of government and things like that. And lastly, the class is going to conclude on the topic of education. Now, in this class, we're going to discuss, believe it or not, there was at one time the Bible was used in the public school system. Of course, nowadays it's not. It's very antagonistic, or rather it's being antagonized by the public school system, which is crazy, but that is the case. But we're going to look at how that came about, the great degradation of how education has just been, it's been stolen from us, to say the least. The educational system has been stolen from Christians. It's been stolen. We've been robbed. And it's been over a period of time. Supreme Court cases come into the mix. But before the Supreme Court cases came into the mix, it was a cultural thing. And this is where you're going to get into some of the subversive groups that were behind it, that were American. But nevertheless, we're going to get into all that. But then we're going to get into what we can do to restore it. Because this is the thing. We know from Scripture, from John 10, that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what exactly Satan has done. He has stolen, and he is destroying this nation right in front of our eyes. And he's destroying it through the educational system. He's destroying it through the church. And he's destroying it through our culture, because everything is being turned upside down. In fact, this is something that's controversial, but I'm going to say it. If you get to know me more, you'll know I'm a controversial person. But anyway, I look at this as this. When you start to understand the nature of the church right now, and nature of this nation, I think the transgender issue is a parable to what's happening to the nation. I think it's almost like a sign. Now, you may say, Rochelle, why are you saying that? I'm saying that because of this. Just like how a transgender, who is biologically a male or biologically a female, is attempting to become something that they can't, or something that they're not designed to be, is exactly what's happening to our free republic of the United States. We were designed to be a nation of virtue, of Christians, based upon Scripture. Now, everyone's not going to be a Christian. I'm not saying everyone's going to become a Christian, but it was based upon the idea of Christianity. But now, because of these forces within our nation and outside of it, we're attempting to become something we were never designed to be. And so I do think that the transgender issue is like a parable to the nation. So, in saying that, when it comes to the educational portion, we're going to go through that, and we're going to look at what we need to do to restore it. Because I do believe God's going to restore it. But I must say this. I don't believe it's possible at this point in time that you can reform the public school system. I think it's entirely impossible at this time. The reason why I look at it is because of this. Number one, you have a Department of Education that is thoroughly anti-Christ. It is antagonistic towards anything biblical. And you have your Supreme Court cases that are still not pending, but affect, any type of Christian influence largely. But you have these bureaucratic structures. You have the Department of Education. You have the teachers union. You have the Supreme Court cases that has been ruled. You have all these different things. Now, those things can be overtaken. They could very well be overturned, right? That's possible. Now, it's not on the radar as far as I can tell. But so Roe versus Wade being overturned was on the radar either. But I think even if you overturn that, you still have an issue with the pending ideology. And the pending ideology that is under, over, or in education is secular humanism, which is largely now becoming Marxist, culturally Marxist. And when you understand secular humanism, you understand that it's a godless expression. That's what it is. It's without God. It's like God doesn't even exist. In fact, what's interesting, I wrote an email to the group about, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and I talked about the similarities between secular humanism and that of the Satanic Temple. When you understand that the Satanic Temple, now, this sounds ridiculous, but although they'll say hail Satan and things of the sort, they don't believe in an actual being called Satan, like the actual spiritual being Satan. They don't believe in that. But what they do believe in is rebelling against the Christian structures. They are very anarchist. They're very rebellious. Their ideology is based off of that primarily. They don't believe in anything supernatural per se or nothing like that. But they rebel against anything Christian. That's why they have upside down crosses as their symbols and things of the sort, Baphomet and all that. Now, when it comes to our humanists, a secular humanist, they may not identify as being a Satanist, but ideologically speaking, they're just about the same. In fact, if you go on the Satanic Temple website, they even have a frequently asked question box on there. And there's even a question on there about what's the difference between so many words, the Satanic Temple and humanist, and because there isn't much difference, and they go into their little differences here and there, but for the most part, it's the same thing. I tell people, it's when you start talking about the Satanic Temple. Now, there is a difference between the Satanic Temple and the Satanic Church. There's two different things, but they're similar too. But when you start talking about the Satanic Temple and secular humanism, they are identical twins. That's what they are. They're identical twins. They're very similar. They're that similar. And that's the undergirding ideology now that's in the school system. Now, of course, they're not teaching, Satanic Temple stuff, but they're teaching secular humanism, which ideologically is the same thing, just without any spiritual moorings per se, although there is. But anyway, the point is, I just can't see how that can be reversed at this point. So what we are proposing is, let's do our own thing. We're Christians. There are enough Christians. What I mean by that is this, before I go off on a tangent with that, what I'm saying is why don't we start our own Christian school network based off of biblical principles and how they relate to our American liberty? Why can't we do that? And our philosophy is the principle approach. You can see it on our website. I go into detail about it, which is a philosophy based off of biblical principles and how it's integrated into American liberty, which has a heavy emphasis on godly virtue, virtuous living, and just also engaging our reasoning capacities and reasoning and understanding things, thinking critically about ideas, not being indoctrinated per se, but also learning how to be a virtuous person. And my thing is this: why can't we have a school network or school district region wide across New England teaching our kids in this manner? And the reason why I say that is, I don't think nothing can stop us. Now, funding can, but my thing is this: there are enough believers, there's enough conservatives that are fed up with what's going on in the school system. But the problem is we spend a lot of our time sending memes, complaining, and all that stuff, but we're not doing anything. And so this is a way that we can do something. We can pull our money together and say, you know what? We're going to start our own thing. And we're going to rival the state and be better. So I'm going to get into that in that class. So anyway, I've been talking for, I guess now, 30 minutes. So I just wanted to make this video. This is actually my second video. The first video, the volume was off, so I had to make it over again. But anyway, I hope you guys are, hope I piqued your interest for the class. If you're interested, go to UnitedAmericaChristianAcademy.org, send me a note, and I will get back to you about the link that we're going to use. It's probably going to be right here on YouTube probably, but I'll send you the link that we're going to use for the class. And feel free to ask me any other questions, any thoughts, or if you want to get involved, or if you want to donate, whatever it may be, let me know, and we can go on from there with that. So with that being said, I'm about to go to a prayer meeting, so I'll be talking to you guys soon. God bless. Talk to you later.